Welcome to Babblecom 5. So, my good dear friends, we have a trailer for Babylon 5 The Road Home. If you have not watched all of Babylon 5, I would stay clear of the trailer, I'm afraid. So, I'm going to go through the trailer itself, do a little bit of commentary on that for you, and I want to breeze get into the trailer as far as I can with my own sort of level of knowledge, which may not be saying much, but I'm going to try for you. And I want to line up a little bit with the original series as well, because, why wouldn't you, basically? So, let's talk about where it sits in terms of the entire series. And if if you care about spoilers for Babylon 5 at all, just go away now if you haven't seen this whole series, because this is going to get seriously spoiler heavy seriously quickly, okay? Okay. So, we start at the end of episode 21 of season 5, Objects at Rest. That is pretty much exactly where the trailer starts, with Sheridan bidding farewell to Babylon 5 in the White Star, saluting the command crew, the new command crew, and heading off to Minbar to take up residence in the new headquarters of the Interstellar Alliance. So that's where we begin. And it's a very nice recreation of it. JMS has said that they've tweaked the White Star a little bit. They made it a bit larger. The cockpit is a bit larger than it was originally. They're just kind of, tweaking stuff, basically. But it looks like a White Star. The jump point kind of looks like a jump point. Jump gate kind of looks like a jump gate. The station is the station. It's all good. And so we see them heading off. And what then follows is kind of what I thought it was going to be about, in the sense that Sheridan becomes unstuck in time again. So the trailer is referencing, in effect, several episodes of the original series. And I have here in my little notepad the episodes that I think it's referencing. I think there are more characters as well that are getting referenced, but they're not necessarily directly from scenes. But we start as far back, I think, as episode 13 of season 1, which is Signs and Portents, which is also the title of the first season. And I go back that far because that is the episode in which Sinclair was shown a vision of Babylon 5 being destroyed. Not the how, but the what of it going up, basically. So a shuttle leaves just before the station goes up. We don't see what causes it, but we see that it's a possible future. And that's the key thing. It's a possible future. And that blowing up happens in this trailer. Now, it might not be that blowing up, but the scene is not dissimilar to what we see in Signs and Portents. So, already the trailer is calling out way back to season 1, which is lovely for those of us who are first ones who are familiar. Now, the big obvious callback is to Babylon Squared, which I have here as episode 20 of season 1. Now, you may recall that in Babylon Squared, Babylon 4 turns up unexpectedly, and Sinclair and Garibaldi go out to it and pull off all of its original crew to save them, as tachyon emissions go off the scale, various flash forwards, flashbacks happen, and during those events we see that Garibaldi is having a sort of a last stand against something, someone, some people, who knows, who are invading the station, and he's sort of letting rip with a massive sort of Gatling gun type PPG and encouraging Sinclair to get off, and there's also dialogue about having rigged reactors to blow. And of course that is almost certainly what we are seeing in this trailer, is that version of events that never play out. in the series version that we see. But in this trailer, we clearly see he and Sinclair opening up on shadows, which I think are invading Babylon 5. I have heard some people think that they're on Epsilon 3. I think they're on Babylon 5. When you look at the walkways, I think they're human walkways, not Epsilon walkways. But anyway. So anyway, big boom. And we also see at the end of the trailer, obviously, Babylon 5 goes up, looks like it's taking some shadow ships with it. But it looks like Sheridan has triggered the self-destruct sequence himself on the station. Now, what that has to do with him getting back to his own timeline, I don't know. That obviously is something that remains to be seen. Now, I couldn't immediately think, and tell me in the comments please, I couldn't immediately think of a season 2 episode that is linked into this, because we didn't tend to go timey-wimey again until season 3. So in season 3, I'm thinking episode 5, Voices of Authority. And the reason I immediately thought of that episode was when Sheridan is moving through time and alternate timelines. He goes through these sort of bluish tubes in space. And there's a comment about sliders, which has got to be some sort of meta comment about the TV series Sliders, which involves shifting through alternate realities. But we've seen those tubes before, because in Voices of Authority, Ivanova gets plugged into the Great Machine on Epsilon 3 instead of Droll, and she moves with her mind's eye through blue tubes as she's looking for the first ones, and when she sees Earth Force 1 getting blown up. So that, to my mind, is clearly a call back to Epsilon 3. Now, whether that means that Sheridan at some point uses Epsilon 3 to travel, or if it's just symptomatic of the fact that Epsilon 3 caused him to become unstuck in time, and it's just a factor of that. It may just be that, I think. But of course, coming on to that, we've got War Without End. And that was season 3, episodes 16 and 17 by my reckoning. And that's the biggie for this, because that was where we saw Sheridan come unstuck in time. And there's a scene in the trailer which is a dead reproduction of a scene in that episode, or episode 16, the first episode of War Without End, where Zathras is giving them their time stabilizers and explaining what they do. And in the background of that scene, you see Marcus Cole over Zathras' shoulder. And I've got that capture, so you can see that is you know, scene for scene, that's what they're reproducing. So it's a direct callback to that scene. And in the course of that episode, the White Star is hit by an explosion from a bomb that was going to be used to blow up Babylon 4, but of course wasn't. But the shockwave from that detonation destroyed Sheridan's time stabilizer, or at least damaged it. And he then got caught in the time stream and became unstuck in time because his time stabilizer was damaged. And as a result, it seems that he is now more sensitive to tachyons than the others who were present who did have their time stabilizers on. So Delenn doesn't seem to be affected in the same way that he is, but it's probably because he's had a bigger dose of sort of unadulterated tachyons to this point. So that is the key sequence which allows for the road home to happen, it would seem, because he has this sort of condition similar to Sinclair, whereby he's been exposed more than would otherwise have been the case, and so he's sensitive to tachyons, you know, unanchoring him from his temporal reality. But in this case, apparently also his actual timeline is out and out, his sort of the prime timeline. So he's actually going to go down different timelines. And I did wonder whether part of this might be because he was touched by a Vorlon. Now, see, that's something else that he doesn't have in common with everyone else. So I wonder if he's actually more sensitive. And like Ivanova, who was partially telepathic, he can actually influence where he goes in a bit for Sam Beckett style. You know, maybe he can actually pick which lines he goes down so that he can eventually find the road home. That's my hypothesis. another interesting little sort of snippet that I picked up on, I'm sure many of you did as well, is that I think that the trailer starts and ends with Jakar. And I say it starts with him because the quotation that Sheridan gives when he's about to flick the switch on whatever the power source is that he kicks off on Minbar, he talks about the future arriving in moments of revelation. And he says that a good friend of his once said it, but actually, I don't think he said it to him. Because Sheridan was on Zahadum at the time. Because in Season 3, Episode 22, there is a closing monologue from Jakar, which talks about, well, is basically that snippet of dialogue or monologue, that Sheridan talks about at the very start of the trailer. And that was done by Jakar. So I think that there's a front end, which is Jakar, and then of course we see a character who I'm assuming is Jakar, but his outfit is quite different to Jakar's. It's not his normal dress, and so I'm not entirely sure if it's Jakar. I thought it might even have been Talon, but I'm imagining that it is the revoiced Jakar for the purposes of the trailer, and that they've sort of bookended it with his words at either end. That's my guess. Now, in terms of other stuff that we see, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that is going on here. We don't know how much of what we see is alternate timelines. It looks like the Franklin could be an alternate Franklin, or he's a much older Franklin. He's got a white uniform on, which I don't recognise. I'm not sure that we've seen that in the series before. It looks like he's on Earth because there's a scene where you can see out the window, and it looks like there's a sky behind it rather than space, and it looks like there are hover cars. So I think it's probably Earth in a similar fashion to the Lost Tales. We see Patricia Tallman's character, but we don't know exactly. We don't know if it's enhanced Lita. I rather suspect it isn't, because I'm getting a sort of a vibe from this that suggests to me that maybe the Vorlons didn't do so well in the last war, because if Babylon 4 didn't go back, maybe, then they didn't do so well in the previous war, so the Shadows are stronger now. That reasoning would be supported by the idea that Babylon 5 is getting assaulted by the Shadows directly, because that was said to be a result of the White Star not yet having gone back to save Babylon 4. So again, theory, but it's probably not an unreasonable theory given what we seem to know at this point. We also, of course, see what I assume is Earth getting the moon blasted towards it. I figured that out now, having looked at the trailer a bit more. So there's a ship behind the moon that's firing a beam at the moon, and the moon then is getting shoved in a Space 1999 fashion out of its orbit and booming into the Earth. Not ideal, but there you go. And in Ivanova, in an Earth Force uniform, not in Interstellar Alliance uniform, and Londo are watching it happen, which is odd because you think they'd want to be off-world when that was happening. But maybe that suggests that Earth got completely defeated at some point, and this is kind of the last huzzah, if you like, because there's literally nowhere left for them to go. It's a curious one. And Sheridan's there in the same uniform with his link and everything else, so he seems to be appearing each time as if he was, in the same sort of dress and everything else that he was when he first jumped. Now, whether or not people in the timeline see him like that, I don't know. If that's just kind of for us, I don't know. But it's an interesting one. So it's kind of, I don't really know again what the suggestion is there. It may well mean that somebody else came out on top as a result of the Shadow War. So I wonder if it's the Narn. Maybe the Narn won this time or something. And it kind of questions. We haven't seen a single trace of the Vorlons at all in the entirety of that trailer. Might be intentional, might not be. Don't know. See Sheridan's father. Almost without doubt, that's his dad that we see. I'm just trying to think what else we saw. We saw the Icarus, So we know that he's going to go back and see the Icarus get met by the shadows, and there are a lot of shadows. We see them sort of doing their little sort of skittering thing out of crevices on what is, clearly Zahadum. But I wonder again whether or not that's going to play out slightly differently, because they seem to be in quite full force, and I don't know whether that was what was, because I thought they were asleep when the Icarus landed last time. They don't look very sleepy this time. So again, there seems to be a bit of a sort of a tweak happening there. So obviously I've been throwing up some images that you'll have seen as I've been sort of talking through this, just to sort of compare and contrast. Things like the Star Furies. Another thing I noticed, right at the start of the trailer, the Star Furies are actually engaging shadow fighters. Wasn't immediately obvious to me, but when I looked at it, when I slowed it down, I thought, okay, yeah. So they're actually toe to toe with shadow fighters, which was a nice touch. So clearly, what we're seeing is a version of events where the vast majority of things that we saw in the series didn't actually probably get triggered, because otherwise these things wouldn't be panning out. But we are clearly very focused on the alternate timeline that we saw in War Without End first part, where Garibaldi goes to the rift and scans Ivanova's video message, and in fact we see several scenes from that video message as well. And again, I'll sort of marry those up with the actual scenes that we saw in the original season, because they, again, in that little clip from War Without End, we saw shadow ships next to the station, and we saw Ivanova with a sort of a mangled head. Clearly, lots of booms today, folks. Oh yes, quite a few clips of Zathras in there as well, which is lovely to see. And again, I've got sort of comparisons of him and his animated form as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Sheridan does move, how many different timelines he visits, what they might hint at, what other roads could be taken, and it'd be interesting to see if it does have any influence on the time that he then had left from that point. So does he choose slightly different routes that he wouldn't have chosen otherwise because of what he sees now? There was no, obviously, that we've had no reference to this in, say, Sleeping in Light, for example. I mean, Sleeping in Light was a number of years on, and it will have been after the events of this film. So it's kind of interesting whether or not he will get any foreknowledge, but he may not get foreknowledge of his timeline, of course. A bit like War Without End itself. You can't be absolutely sure when you saw War Without End that was how things were going to go, because Delenn told him not to go to Zahadum in War Without End. So maybe one of these timelines that we're going to see is what happens when he doesn't go to Zahadum. Also possible. I mean, you can imagine my brain's just going, whoa, and we've still got nearly 2 months before this is released. But the trailer is clearly doing well. I think there's probably quite a lot of buzz off the back of the trailer. You can pre-order it now, so if I can do some links, I'll do some links in the description below for the pre-order. And I'm going to run through the trailer now, and I'm hoping it's not going to copyright hit me or anything. But what I accidentally did, ironically, when I was trying to capture the trailer, I ended up playing it back at half speed. So it'll go through more slowly than you'll have seen it, and I'm going to take the original sound off it, so hopefully I won't get clobbered for that. But I will do a little sort of commentary as it goes through at that new speed. And I literally did it kind of randomly. I just shouted stuff out. So I recorded that before I recorded this, because I realised playing it through slowly, my brain was just sort of going, yeah, recognise that, recognise that, recognise that, recognise that. So I'm going to try and sort of, do a bit of a mash together of comparisons between the animated version and the original version, just so you can see, the tweaks and the reproductions and the callbacks. And, it's clever how they're doing it, because it's a shame in a sense. And, I say this with all the love in the world for the series, but if you come to this as a new person, they may well go so far off-piste for the most part that it won't matter to you. In the sense that if it's all alternate timelines, then you don't get spoiled for the original timeline, which is good. But for people like us who have seen it before, for the first ones, we are obviously going to be telling people not to watch it if they are currently engaged in the series. So the Grey 17 podcast people, for example, they're not even midway through season 3, I don't think. So this would be spoiler city, because it is going to reproduce stuff. You'll see stuff, people, even just glimpses of people, which will be spoilers. And the one downside of, I suppose, of having a 5-year arc like Babylon 5 was originally, is that if you then start doing stuff around the edges of it, it's very hard to do it in isolation without spoiling stuff for people who haven't seen the whole thing yet. So it's ironic in a sense that it's a victim of its own success in that the arc worked beautifully, but it can have holes poked in it if you see stuff too soon. So it's kind of the whole packaging on the box ought to be spoilers if you haven't seen the original series over the course of... And ironically, it's a big commitment for people these days when you consider that most shows these days are like 10 episodes per season, maybe 50, maybe an hour long, 50 minutes an hour long each episode. It's only 10 hours. Babylon 5, you've got 110 episodes to get through at 45-ish minutes long each. It's a big time commitment. I know, because I've done my watch through, which is why I have so many screenshots I can use to do this sort of exercise. But it's a big commitment for someone to actually sit and watch the whole thing and absorb it before they can then watch a new hour-plus long film. I think it's 77 minutes, I heard somebody say. And so it's not like a massive, massive long film. But nevertheless, we are, what needs sort of 30 years on from the original series, and we're getting new Babylon 5 content with some of the original voice actors at least, and that's remarkable. When I started doing my rewatch through about nearly 3 years back now, never in a million years did I think I'd be sitting here chatting to you, getting giddy about a new Babylon 5 animated feature. It wasn't on the radar. But what seems to have happened is that there was someone at Warner Brothers who clearly wasn't a fan, and then that person just seems to have sort of dropped away. And now all of a sudden, we're getting sort of reboot enthusiasm, we're getting this film enthusiasm, clearly. But the whole sort of series has come to life in a way that it hasn't been for years. We've had, the upgraded versions on Amazon and, various streaming services now. So who knows? We might be seeing a proper sort of renaissance, which would be lovely. Lots of podcasts out there. Go and check out the podcast. Really well done. I'm not doing one myself because I'm not that sophisticated, I don't think, to be honest. But I have got all my synopses and reactions in my own special way on my channel on Babblecom 5 as a playlist, so you can sort of watch through the whole thing. You can watch it spoiler free because I don't spoil as I go. I only spoil for stuff that you would have naturally watched by the point I get to, so it's safe in that sense. So if you wanted to try and recap the series and just listen to it, you could use my playlist to do that. The audio quality does improve as it goes along, I promise, to a reasonable extent. But that's really all I've got for this, I think. So I'm gonna let the video portion of it play now. Hopefully I don't get clobbered for that. But thanks for sticking with me. Obviously, do comment below. I'm gonna put a warning in in the actual description of the video to make sure that people who want to avoid spoilers can avoid spoilers, because I think you will have to talk spoilers to discuss the trailer here. So hope you enjoy. Hope you all enjoy the full film, and we better go pre-order it, kids, because the more we pre-order it, the more we actually buy it, the more likely we are to see more Babylon 5. So let's do that thing. Cheers for now. So what we have here, I think, is a shadow ship threatening the station, shadow fighters chasing Star Furies around. This is probably from the Babylon Squared flashbacks where the station is being invaded by the shadows. Here we have all is sweetness and calm before anything bad happens, but clearly what we are going to see is what happens if it didn't go according to plan the first time round. Nice White Star Bridge set there. And we assume that's Tracy Scoggins, and that's the last few moments of the penultimate episode of Babylon 5, Objects at Rest. This is Dylan and John together. I do like the animation. The animation is growing on me. Love it. From the creator of Babylon 5, like it would be from anybody else. So this is Minbar. This is the capital of the Minbari Federation. Now, there's some sort of new device being brought online for the first time here, but unfortunately, it's tachyon powered. And because John once came unstuck in time, I'm assuming it only affects him rather than Delenn. He is affected by the tachyons and he becomes unstuck in time and in realities this time, it seems. Interesting, he's still got his link on there. I don't know whether the link would actually work outside of Babylon 5 itself, but he's obviously going to travel with these clothes and with that link on him, it seems, throughout, you know, and it's funny that it's referred to as sliding, because everyone got that sort of, that gag. But actually, I think it's a nod of the head to something else. Now, this is the Icarus. This is the ship that his wife and Mr. Morden were on. That's his dad. So in the cornfields where he sort of grew up. That's Epsilon, the shuttle going down there. Now, presumably that's Earth. Now, this looks very much like War Without End. An actual clip from that with Marcus in it. And that's an older Franklin with a white uniform. I don't know if that's an Admiral uniform, or if it's an alternate Franklin, possibly. Now, these tubes, they remind me very much of the pathways that Ivanova followed when she was using the Great Machine. So although it's referred to as sliding, I actually think that's a Great Machine link. This looks like Zahadum and the Icarus and the squad, you know, the people there being surrounded. This is new. This is Ivanova in her Earth Force uniform and Londo seemingly watching the world end. And this is Sheridan obviously facing off some shadows using Earth tech. And London there, that looks like it looks like a beam hitting the moon to push the moon. That's what it looks like. That's a clip we've seen before. That looks like, now Sinclair's got a funny haircut here. I think that's Sinclair on the left. I mean, presumably it must be, but it doesn't massively look like him. And then some sort of auto-destruct sequence, which Sheridan triggers, which is odd because I wouldn't have thought he'd have the authority to if it's Sinclair's station. Combat with the shadows, who have some sort of energy shields. Garibaldi there, Lita there, saying it's time to blow stuff up, armed with the PPG. And it looks like the station detonating kills off quite a few shadow ships in the same moment. And that looks like possibly, I would say it was Ivanova's last stand, but she doesn't look wounded there. That's the moon crashing into Earth, possibly Linear. Although Linear wouldn't have been around at the end of season 5, logically. And Zathras. Something happening there that looks different. Core going critical, possibly. Station going critical, definitely. Again, we've seen that as a potential outcome in Signs and Portents. And now right at the end, we see someone who looks like, I'm assuming that's Lockley and Zathras. And then sort of fade out sequence there, the road home, which is nice. Now, I think everyone is assuming that this character is Jakar, but the clothing is odd for Jakar. Coming soon.